welcome to the latest episode of Southside Stories, where we talk to entrepreneurs and leaders who are doing great things in the city of London. And today, I'm really pleased to welcome Vince to Southside Stories. Hello, Vince. So, Vince, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you based? And we know it's in London somewhere, but where are you based? And your job title, and just a little bit about your company.
Yes, great. Well, thanks first of all for having me on. My name is Vince Ruane. I'm a chartered engineer by background, by trade. I'm based currently in Brixton, and I am a South London boy. I grew up around Lewisham, so not come too far, but big fan of South London in general. I've got a number of different roles. I'm the founder and director of RCDC, which is a sustainability and building services consultancy. We have a team of 15 and we work on a number of different projects, a number of different sectors, on values of projects from anywhere from 100,000 to 30 million pounds. I'm also the founder and CTO of Aerify, which is a company that we spun out of RCDC. And that company is bringing to market a product called Smart Windows. We had £150,000 in government grant funding to develop the product to an early commercial stage. And we're now starting to look at raising to do some more commercial trials. I'm also the vice chair of CIBSE, which is the Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers Education Building Group, very long title. And that really aims to drive conversation and knowledge share around best practice for design of schools, universities, nurseries, colleges, education sector buildings within the UK. And finally, I am the co-chair for the Alliance of Construction Networks, or ACN, particularly the education and residential sectors. And the ACN is a networking group which drives conversation and connections within the built environment in a sector-specific manner.
Great. So that's a lot there. You sound like a very busy man.
Yeah, I don't enjoy being kind of struggling to find things to do. So yeah, I tend to keep myself quite busy.
The common strand through all of that is effectively the built environment and construction. Is that right?
Yes, and there's some other kind of key themes which I'm sure we'll.
Yeah. And what's your background? Did you study engineering?
Yeah, so I've got a master's in mechanical engineering, specializing in aerospace. And in doing my degree in aerospace engineering, I realized that that wasn't a sector that I particularly wanted to work in. I think it's a great sector, but one that just wasn't suited to my personality, really. When I left university, I sort of entered the job market working for a large consultancy, WSP, and kind of ended up in the building services team. And from there, I knew nothing about, a sector that I absolutely love, and was really glad that I kind of fell into somewhat.
And what led you from WSP through to running your own company and all the different projects you're involved with? What was the driver from moving from an employee to becoming an entrepreneur?
So I was at WSP for a few years. I went to another company called Condal, which is again a very good multidisciplinary engineering design consultancy business. I was on their kind of fast track partner program, and I realized that I didn't really want to spend the rest of my career working within a larger corporate business, one which needed to prioritize some of the commercial aspects over perhaps some of the other elements that could be prioritized, such as sustainable design or innovation. And not to say, again, a very good company, but larger corporate organizations need to behave in certain ways. It's very understandable. It's very common. And it just didn't feel like an environment that I want to, spend the rest of my career in. So I quit my job without any plan. I was frustrated at a few things in the company that were going on. And I just sort of handed my notice in. And I thought I'll do a bit of freelance work for a couple of years, build up a bit of a pot of money, and see where things go from there. And I had a few ideas I wanted to try out, but nothing concrete. Within months of leaving, I'd picked up a couple of quite big projects and then started employing people myself on a initially freelance basis. And then after a while, I thought I need some permanent people. That was back in 2019. I started the business. 2020, we had our first permanent staff. And from there, it's just organically grown. I think, we do good work where we're good at listening to our clients, and delivering exactly what they want rather than exactly what the engineer wants, which I think is a problem our industry can sometimes have. And yeah, we've got lots of repeat business, lots of recommendations to others, and yeah, it's just kind of grown organic.
Tell us a little bit about the construction industry. I mean, we're going to talk about innovation, especially around sustainability in a minute, especially when we get to Aerify. But just tell me a little bit about working in the construction industry, perhaps with a lens of sustainability and innovation. How innovative do you think the construction industry is?
Well, Innovate UK do regular studies looking at how innovative companies feel they are, how much innovation is occurring within different industries. Real estate and construction regularly come bottom. The last two studies I've seen, which cover the last sort of 7 or 8 years, both times they've been bottom, which is not where you want to be. It's a sector that, from a sustainability perspective, is responsible for circa 30-40% of emissions within the UK. So it's a sector that needs drastic change in order to actually align with the wider legal obligations that the UK has set itself, as well as, I think, the kind of moral aspirations that lots of people have in terms of trying to limit the effects of climate change. But I think it's a sector where every project, many of which have really, really significant values, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or more billions of pounds. They're all unique in a sense. So you tend to have a different team, different set of engineers and architects and clients and project managers, and this very large build-up of teams. It can be hundreds of designers, and then potentially thousands of people actually building the thing. The design itself is unique, and it needs to be prepared quickly because you need to get people on site to actually start to monetize the asset as soon as you can. And with all that, it means that it can be hard for innovation to find its place within that process. Innovation requires time. It requires an element of acceptance of risk. And if you are the company or the individual that's spending £100 million on the redevelopment of a project, you don't really want to be. It's difficult to accept that risk, I think, and it's very hard to get anything that is leading edge into buildings. It's hard to get things that are leading edge into buildings. If something works, people like that because they know it'll work. They know they can then do whatever they need to do with that asset, be it run a school or sell a flat or have a company come in and use that as their office space. So for very good reason, construction is historically and I think currently pretty bad at innovation, and it's quite a hard cycle to break out of as well.
Because I guess actually, if you're a constructor, you're very subject to regulations, building regs, all sorts of different regulations, emission regulations. So you sort of have those parameters already set for you effectively, don't you? But how is the industry, how does change happen in the industry? Is it from completely external forces to construction? Where do you see change coming from?
I think different sectors have different drivers. So some of the sectors, so say, residential, particularly larger residential developers and those kinds of, out of town, large developments, that part of the industry tends to be very commercially driven. Change there tends to be driven much more by regulation than other sectors where companies have to do things to meet certain regulations. Other sectors, such as the commercial world, where there's a highly competitive environment to provide, good office space, particularly in places like central London, and other big cities, and even out of city science parks and all these kinds of places. There, the kind of commercial aspect means that actually companies are trying to strive to be better than one another and deliver better projects, deliver more sustainable projects. And that part of the sector has a much more self-driven element to it, which delivers results. There's some really, really sustainable developments that come out. And the other big part of it is that there's regulation, and planning is the other big part. And planning is quite an interesting aspect of it because of the regionality. So the London plan, which applies to all of the London boroughs, is is a very good example of a set of planning regulation which is starting to drive change in the industry. The obvious example there is the uptake in things like whole life carbon assessments rather than just operational carbon. So that's the kind of looking at all the carbon associated with the material that goes into the building rather than just the emissions associated with running the building. That's now becoming much more widely understood, applied, reviewed, analysed because of the London plan adopting um, the need to undertake whole life carbon assessments for major developments. So there's different aspects. It's quite a I think it depends which side of the sector you're looking at really as to what the answer is.
Who delivers the London plan? Is that the mayor office or is that another body? Have you seen any great examples of an interesting sustainable project in the UK or specifically London?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of great examples. I mean, some of the controversial stuff that's happened recently, the M&S development on Oxford Street, where M&S wanted to knock down their current office and build a new one in its place, and the local borough there said no because of this whole life carbon assessment, and said no. What you should try and do is retain the existing structure and build your new building around that. The carbon associated with the concrete and the steel that goes into the structure is probably the largest part of the emissions associated with any kind of build. And that was interesting because this back and forth that you had between the S and the London Borough, and it went to the High Court, I think it was in the end, and they actually ruled in favour of M&S. And disappointingly, they ruled in favour because they said the science wasn't well enough understood, which was a very disappointing ruling for someone like myself who feels it's well enough understood to know that what was being said by the boroughs was technically correct. So yeah, that was quite a disappointing and quite a controversial decision.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. I guess there was they were challenging the borough, I guess, and some of its scientific evidence, and the court found in the other way. So that building is, and everybody will know in London, that building. So that building is going to be completely redeveloped from scratch.
I believe that is the current plan. Yeah, I don't know if there's been other developments since, but yeah, I believe that.
Am I right in thinking they're quite strict and fines, and the carbon emissions per year is measured, and developers have a very strict set of carbon emissions they need to adhere to, or they're charged per ton of carbon emission per year for the lifetime of the building. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, there's a period of time. I think it's 45 years. I'd have to double check, but it's something like that where if they don't meet the carbon emissions that are calculated through the regulatory processes, the either SAP or SBEM processes, then yeah, you need to pay the difference, and there is a £1 per ton of carbon charge, which then in theory the council reinvests into carbon reduction projects elsewhere within the borough. But I think there's definitely there's a new set of regulations coming out. We think this year. The government haven't actually announced a date for it yet, but the everything that we've heard suggests it's coming out this year. And there's within that a new set of calculation methodologies, which we think will be better than the current ones, because I think there's a lot of flaws in how we have calculated these things in the past, which means the amount that people are paying is probably not proportional to the carbon, and it's done in a kind of level playing field manner, which is good from a developer perspective and a planning perspective. But I think technically the numbers never really matched what actually happens. So hopefully there'll be improvements coming in the next kind of it's probably going to be October where that regulation comes out. Which means October 26th it will come into effect. At that point, we'll start to see, again, probably more money being paid in terms of those kind of carbon levies, which, again, good and bad in terms of thinking about some of the development needed in certain parts of London and the wider country. But from a sustainability perspective, at least, it will drive people to have more sustainable development.
If you were going to give the construction industry as a whole a report card and you were going to grade them, say where A is, outstanding, where would you rate the industry currently?
Um, it's probably a C or a D, something like that. I wouldn't say it's an A. I think we had the I think it's a Hackett report came out after Grenfell, and I think they were a bit harsher than I was in terms of how they rated it from a safety perspective. And I think the findings for people that aren't familiar with the sector as to how the sector operates were quite scary for a lot of people, thinking, this everyone's safety depends on, the buildings that they're living in, they're working in, they're learning in, whatever it may be, are built safely, and will provide them the protection they need if there are fires and other kind of incidents like that. So, yeah, I think the industry knows there's a lot of change required. I think there are appetites to improve in certain elements of it, but as I said, towards the start, change is hard, and the industry in particular is quite bad at doing that. So I think it's not going to be a quick process, but hopefully one that will show some results.
Let's switch then to RCDC and your work with the industry. Tell us a little bit about RCDC and what problems specifically are you looking to solve?
So we're a building services and sustainability consultancy. So building services is design of all the mechanical, electrical, and public health elements in buildings. So that's your ventilation, heating, cooling, lighting, small power, data, fire alarms, drainage, all that kind of stuff that goes into the building. The stuff that makes the building actually work and operate and be usable. And we try and do the design for that with a very kind of sustainable goal to make sure that from both that life cycle and operational perspective, the carbon for our projects is as low as possible. We've a fairly simple mission statement, which is to make a positive difference through the work that we do. And we have three key principles that we try and apply, which are digitalization, innovation, and sustainability. We've done a lot of work around what those mean, particularly sustainability. It's a very broad topic. So we've kind of worked through definition as a team, which is a very long definition. I'm not going to go into that, but I'll give you my definition, which is much more around change. It's changing how we do things and changing it in a positive way. So that's kind of who we are. And in terms of what we do, so some examples of the projects we're doing, a lot of heat pump replacement projects for larger buildings, probably doing about 10 or 11 million pounds worth of heat pump replacements across a couple of universities and some schools. We're also turning an old office building into a hotel in Bank in the centre of London, which is a really interesting one. Doing a refurbishment of a historic theatre in Dorking. Again, a very interesting project. Lots of residential projects, quite a few SEN school projects, so special education needs school projects, particularly down towards the south coast. It's a real mixed bag. We tend to get involved in lots and lots of different things. And I think the thing we do well, and I think the thing that our clients like, is that we will try and understand and solve their issues, their problems, rather than just applying a generic engineering solution or reapplying the one that we done earlier, that Blue Peter kind of moment of you pull out the design already on day one and you just try and tweak it to suit the ins and outs of whatever the building is that the client's trying to design or redesign. So I think that's kind of that's why people like working with us, and I think what we try and deliver.
At what point do you get involved with the projects? Because let's take any of these examples, maybe the theatre one, because presumably there's an architect involved and other parts of the construction kind of project team. At what point do you get involved with the project?
So in that particular instance, we actually got involved the very first meeting. So it's a council that owns the theatre. They came to a project management firm that they work with a fair bit. And they came to us because we work with them quite a lot. We're one of their sort of trusted partners. And Simon, the guy who was kind of picked it up on the PM side, he invited me along to go and talk to the client. mainly because there was quite a strong decarbonisation aspect to the project, and that's kind of what we do with them. So he knew that we could immediately start providing some useful advice around program, time frame, cost, all those kinds of things. But yeah, it's a real mixed bag. I had a phone call this morning from I think a group of guys that were literally on site saying, "Could you do some design work for us because we've started this project?" So it can range from they're trying to build something and they need design tomorrow to I mean some of the projects we've got on now. One of the projects for one of the private schools that we're doing, we started in 2020. We're in phase 2 at the moment, and phase 3 will be delivered next summer. Sorry, this summer. This summer. So you can get these projects that are 5 or 6 years long. We get involved right from the off, or usually quite near the start, really.
And is the work always sort of project by project, or do you, with all your knowledge about sustainability now that you've built up over the years, do you engage with the industry on a wider, broader level, or is it more project by project?
We do some of the interesting stuff we get to do include writing design guidance and things like standard employers requirements, which we've not done a huge amount of, but we've done a little bit for 2 separate councils. Just finished one of those for Crawley Council recently. And I think the work with both the CIBSE Education Building Group and the ACN, I think that's the interesting conversations that I'm lucky enough to be quite at the center of those groups and get to have lots of different conversations, lots of different people around the good and the bad that they're seeing and around the challenges. And then with the ACM we have a couple of events a month, and there'll always be a topic. And so usually you find from a conversation one of these topics starts to form into a bit of the beginnings of an event. And then the feedback that you get from that, from the audience, and the insight that you get from the speakers, who are often experts in that particular bit of the industry, that's really helpful. And I think it's helpful for the wider industry because we need to talk more. We need to kind of collaborate more. We can be quite siloed and just focused on delivering, which it's construction is can be a bit of a race to the bottom. So it's hard sometimes to find that time. But if we don't do that, we're not going to do any of this improvement, change. It can't be done by individuals. It has to be done from a much wider group perspective.
I should have asked earlier, actually, but ACM and CIBSE, was it?
Yeah.
They are industry bodies.
CIBSE is an industry body, so it's a chartered institution. It's been around for I think over 50 years. ACN is a for-profit organization. It's been around since 2012. Myself and another guy took it over last year after Marcel, who was the original founder, decided to step away to do other things, basically. So, yeah, one's very much an industry body, and which is very useful in that it comes with an element of gravitas and respect, but also means there's constraints over things we can do. The other one, we can kind of do whatever we feel is appropriate, but it doesn't potentially have that kind of background to it.
Let's pivot a little bit to Aerify, because this sounds really interesting, and we had a little chat about this a couple of weeks ago. But tell us what that is. Let's start there.
Yeah, so Aerify is bringing to market a product called Smart Windows. And Smart Windows is a window control system which automatically opens and closes your usual manually openable window to optimize the internal conditions for the occupants. And it does that by we've got an external sensor and an internal sensor. We constantly look at the external and internal environments to figure out how much we should be opening and closing that window to control for pollutants, temperature, humidity, noise, and all the things that really make buildings comfortable to be in. And in doing so, we can do things like reduce the impact of mold by controlling humidity. We can hopefully have beneficial health impacts by reducing the impact of internal pollutants on the building occupants, as well as the impact of external pollutants coming into the space from the outside. So lots of benefits, and also there's a sustainability angle to this as well, where through some research that Loughborough University have done, and we've worked with them on this as well a little bit. Around 5% of UK building emissions are due to open windows. Now we think we can get that 5% down to 1 or 2% through a widespread use of our product or similar products, which could have a significant impact on UK CO2 emissions. And one of the things I should mention is there's no kind of golden bullet to solving any of the kind of emissions issues that we have. It's lots and lots of bricks really that you need to put on top of each other, and they bring you to the point where you can resolve the issue from a much wider perspective and really bring those emissions down to zero. And we think this is one of those little bricks that could really play a big part in the whole process.
And just so I get the solution, so this would be would it be vents in a window, or is it a whole pane opening and closing? What was that?
Yeah,
Like?
it's a whole pane. So it's something that we could retrofit to any window that you've got in your house, or your office, your school, whatever it may be. We need to fit an actuator onto that pane. So we do need to make sure the window itself is in a relatively good condition. If it isn't, you might need to buy a new window. But yeah, this little actuator sits on typically the bottom of a window, and it just opens and closes the window. Very kind of quiet process, which you can barely really notice. Yeah, that's how it works.
And as an alternative to air conditioning or supplementary to air conditioning, or
That's exactly it. It's an alternative, really. That's how we would see it. We're never going to get as good an internal condition with our product as you would do with a fully ventilated and air conditioned space. But the capital cost saving and the carbon saving in all the material, all that kind of stuff that goes into a proper ventilation system, that's very carbon and cost heavy. So our system saves developers potentially substantial amounts of money. And it also provides that kind of improvement in health and well-being for the occupants of the building, which I think has a huge amount of value, both for new build and refurbishment projects.
and where are you with the product? Are you in production? Where was that?
No, we've done small batch production to date.
Yeah.
We've had these 2 grants from the government. The first one allowed us to make a kind of prototype that we had in our office just to do some testing. The second one was a wider real world prototype testing exercise, and then part of that we developed a more up to date version of the product. Tested that up in Scotland within an office building with a test partner, and that was really successful. We found we had a sort of 20% improvement in air quality. We found that we had CO2 levels never exceeded around 1,500 parts per million, which is one of the kind of comfort conditions that you tend to apply in comparison to the kind of before we put the product in that office space. Actually, the air quality was pretty bad in that space. We also found we had about 20% reduction in humidity through the use of the product. So really, really positive results across the board from that initial bit of testing. We are now looking to raise probably in the region of 250 to 300,000 to go through a first stage of commercial trials with various different test partners. And that will hopefully give us then the proof of traction to do a kind of larger raise at some point, probably next year or perhaps early 27, which hopefully then will, from there will really accelerate into, wider development and looking at different regions as well.
Couple of questions there. So funding, I'll come back to in a second. Just on what would be the ideal sort of building or client for Aerify? Is it a refurb, or is it a brand new construction, or is it commercial? Is it residential?
It's very broad. I mean, there's a few areas that we've identified as being particularly where our product really does something useful for the building in comparison to other solutions that are available. So school retrofits is one particular area. There's a huge amount of investment that needs to be made into the UK public school estate, and I say public school, state schools. So we know that but most schools in the UK don't have any ventilation system in them. And we know that air quality is an issue through various trials, and COVID actually showed us that there's a lot of air quality issues within schools in the UK. So that's one particular area where our product is quite easy to retrofit compared to other mechanical ventilation solutions or other solutions. You just need to fit the actuator on. You don't need to change any of the other fabric. You might need to change the windows, but I think a lot of time you have to change the windows in schools anyway. So it's something that we could add on. It might add 10 or 20% extra to the cost of replacing those windows. But for that, you then get a ventilated space, which will lower the energy usage of the building and all those other positives, reduce absenteeism, improve learning outcomes. Lots of positives there. It's a similar story with the NHS and hospitals, where a lot of recovery wards have no ventilation system at all. So you're in this space, but you have poor air quality, you have poor kind of connection to the outside world as well. It feel quite kind of uh, you lack that ability to get up and walk outside. And if just having the window open might be a bit nice, so you can hear a bird song or something like that, depending on where you are, obviously. And the other one is social housing. We know there's, again, quite significant mold issues within the social housing world. We had there's been two quite sad cases of young children who unfortunately have died because of air quality issues, one external, one internal. The internal one was caused by mold. And both of these are leading to much more legislation, regulation around how social housing in particular, but also new build developments and just housing in general is delivered in the UK. So those are three particular areas that we think might be quite good to look at.
And on the funding source, I mean, it sounds a great project, some clear benefits there. I guess a lot of things to consider, isn't there, in terms of the product design and in a school setting, how tamper-proof it is and security issues and how you lock it down at night. And I'm sure there's loads of stuff you're working through there. On the funding side, where do you hope to get funding? Who would be some of the partners you're looking for that?
I think angel investment is what we're looking for at the moment. We're quite aware that the kind of VC and the sort of family house type funding would be looking for someone a bit more advanced in terms of traction and where we are in the development stage. So yeah, angel funding is what we're looking at, but it's a very, very difficult market to get funding at the moment. Mr. Trump has not helped by just throwing a real kind of curveball into the world economy. And in general, any physical product, anything that isn't digital nowadays, which will struggle to have the kind of margins that you will get in selling something digital, it is much harder to actually convince investors to go for that. And again, I fully understand why that is. I guess my disappointment in that is that we do need physical things to enable some of this change that we talked about that will help decarbonize the construction sector. Can't do that for a bit of software alone. There needs to be physical products to do that. So yeah, it's a challenging environment.
What would be your vision? I mean, funding aside, what would be sort of a 3-year milestone for you when you look at the potential for the product?
So we'd love to, in 3 years, we'd love to be, selling at a kind of medium scale within the UK to some, large contractors, hopefully the likes of the DfE, the NHS. We'd like to start to look at some markets that are really of interest to us, such as the German market, which is a very kind of rental dominated market. Most people, I think it's about 80 or 90% of people that live in cities in Germany will rent for their entire lives rather than buying properties. Different set of rules and things like mold are much more of an issue in certain parts there. So yeah, looking to expand into other markets. And one of the things we're trying to do with the product as well is really capture the data. And that's one of the big bits of value that we see, where we're collecting huge amounts of external air quality data and external noise data. And with that being relatively live and historic, there's a huge amount of value in that we could generate for the likes of, say, councils who want to understand what the air quality is like in certain areas. If you're buying a house, you might be interested to know, what is the air quality in on one certain road compared to another other certain road. And we don't really have that granular data available at the moment. And that's something that we'd hope we might be able to start to collect and then provide. So really to start to get the data side of the business going as well is something that I'd be keen to do.
Yeah. As we move, Vince, to sort of wrapping up, you've been running your own businesses for a while. Just tell us a little bit about what that journey's been like. What have been a couple of the highs and lows of running various businesses and entrepreneurial projects over the last couple of years?
I think the highs, I mean, things like when we found out we got the grant, particularly the larger grant, that was a huge win for us. We'd worked really hard to get that. Um, and it's quite, it's a really, the grant funding in the UK is highly competitive. Lots of companies trying to do that, which is great. So to kind of know that you've kind of been picked over all these fantastic products that's a really fantastic feeling for. It's a product that I've kind of developed myself, so it's something that I feel a lot of personal kind of connection with. So that side of it is fantastic. I think there's a lot of stresses with running your own business. I think one of the big challenges is being able to deal with that and how you deal with that. Particularly, first couple of years I think are relatively easy because the excitement and the kind of I guess the newness of it means you can put that to one side. I think when you're into your fourth and your fifth year and you sort of like, oh right, this is this is still happening. These challenges are still here. I think that's when it tends to get harder. And I think for me, I had my first son was born a couple of years ago now, and that was a really challenging time to try and juggle having this fantastic experience of having your first child come along with what was an extremely busy time for the company, really challenging time for the company. That was a bit of a low, but it's again a low that was in mixed in with so many highs. So it's I think it's something I've often thought and often get asked. Would you do it again? I always say 100% I would do it again. I'd perhaps just think about the family timings, things a bit more. But again, you just can't control these things. Life will happen, and you have to kind of roll with it. So yeah.
What advice would you give? I mean, construction is a huge industry. Bit of a left field question, but it's somebody coming out of university. Actually, I was talking to my nephew the other day actually about this. He doesn't really know what he wants to do, but what advice would you give to somebody who wants to enter the construction industry? Are there any particular areas where you think are particularly interesting? Maybe it is sustainability, and this is a bit of a broad question, I realise. But sort of, what advice would you give to somebody who's thinking about embarking on a career in construction?
I think speak to as many people as you can in different fields, because construction, I think construction is a fantastic industry to work in. I've probably been quite negative about it here, but I think in terms of an industry where you can actually get a huge amount of fulfillment, I guess, out of what you do. Seeing some of the buildings that you've worked on actually finally built and being on that very long process, it's a hugely rewarding experience to see and to, something I've really, really enjoyed. So I think the advice I'd give someone is make sure you figure out which bit you're best suited for, because there are so many different roles now within the industry. Even in our role as a building services engineer, you can be a mechanical or an electrical or a public health engineer, or you can specialize in BIM, or you could try and specialize in things like parametric design or energy modeling or compliance. So many different areas that you could get into, and it's there'll be something that is a good fit for yourself, but you just need to kind of work through lots of options to find the right one, because it's not very nice to spend 3 years doing one thing and then realize actually I wanted to do that other thing over there. There's nothing wrong with that, but if you can skip that process, that will definitely help your career.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. Yeah, I was talking to somebody this morning actually about their son and work, just getting work experience, going into offices, just go in, because it's actually quite often very different from how you might imagine it as well. So that's great advice. Last question, Vince. Tell us about a leader who's had, and I ask everybody this question, but a leader that's had the biggest impact on you. I guess when I pose this question, I'm actually thinking about a positive impact mainly, but it could be, perhaps a negative one, but something that you've learned from. But who's a leader that's had a great impact on your professional career?
I think lots and lots of people have had really, really positive impacts on my career. There's been a ton of people that I respect and have learned a huge amount from. Um, and I try and learn something every day. That I don't think you should ever stop trying to learn. But I think my 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 sort of answer to this is more going to be on that negative. I think there's lots of kind of villains almost out there that are lots of bad practice that is being applied. I'm not going to kind of single anyone out, but I think some of the behaviors that we're seeing from leaders is not particularly what I think we should be seeing. And I think we're in a time where there's a lot of significant societal issues that we are facing. Climate change, we've touched on. Rising inequality is another huge thing that you can really, I've said I've lived in London my whole life, and you really sense it and see it, I think, and particularly being in Brixton where we are, I think you can really see the differences. Where you go down one road, it's still a pretty rough estate, and then you walk up the other road and it's multi-million-pound houses. Um, I think business leaders have the opportunity to make a real positive impact on these issues, and it's very hard to do that because the day job is challenging. But I think we should try, because I think we live in the world that we work in, or we should at least. And I feel we can all try and make the world, a slightly better place, to use an overused statement. But I do think it's something that, we should have a bit of a responsibility to do as business leaders, rather than expecting others to do it, and trying to have a bit of a vision for what that world might look like, what that kind of better world might look like. I think perhaps that's something that I feel is somewhat lacking, and perhaps it's not reported enough. Maybe that's what it is. But yeah, that would be my moan. Another moan to add to the moans that I've had.
Well, actually, because I guess because your work, because I was just thinking as you were talking there about, how does that turn up in the real world? What kind of, if somebody's listening to this thinking, actually, you know what, I don't, I'm stuck in my little bubble, and I'm very focused on my job and building a company. How would that, and it's going to be different for everybody, but I guess one of the ways that you do it is actually through some of these other industry bodies that you already spoke about, right? That's one way that you're sort of elevating your knowledge up and sharing it more broadly. I mean, yours is perhaps an industry focus, but finding those the ways to actually interact with society in a broader way.
Yeah, and I think it's having the conversations and having the conversations in the right way with the right people. One of the other things I do a little bit of is lecturing at universities, and it's great to go into universities, and you do sometimes get a bit of a, especially if it's a morning lecture, you get the kind of the glazed over look. But then sometimes the conversations that you can have with some of the people that are coming through, it gives me a great deal of hope that there's a lot of very, very talented, very, very bright, imaginative people coming through that I think can have a hugely beneficial impact on the industry. So I think there's a lot of hope there. But yeah, I think it's trying to find it, push it, and probably not being as negative as I've been on this, and then trying to find some of those positive things to talk about, shout about, and share with everyone.
Well, yeah. Well, actually, Vince, you got some really positive stuff here. I mean, the Aerify. I mean, it's a challenging sort of category in terms of the emissions and making an impact on that. But you're doing something amazing, actually. Yeah, I mean, with Aerify, you've identified a clear problem. You found a solution to it. You've got a product you've already tested up in Scotland. That's a really great positive thing you're doing there. And best of luck with it. I really hope you get the funding. I'm going to definitely check in and see how you're going with it. But we wish you every success with that.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.